Hello and welcome to episode 425 of the Money to the Masses podcast with your resident expert as always, Damien Fay, and me, Andy Leakes. Damien, how are you doing?
I'm really good, Andy. I've been away for a week, so we did have a week off of the podcast, and it actually was me that had the week off. Andy was still working hard as ever with the rest of the Money to the Masses team, so I'm back and refreshed with a slight tan, and it actually has inspired this week's podcast, funnily enough. But before I go on to that, I thought we'd read out a couple of reviews that we've got in. Two of my favourite reviews, actually, that we've had ever. Very creative review writing, which I'm keen to reward. So both of these people are going to get Money to the Masses mugs.
Okay, so let's read out the first one, and this one gets maximum points because they've only gone and written a haiku. And this is from Kiwi1664, and it goes thus: best part of my week, Money to the Masses pod, downloads on my phone. There we go. That is a beautiful haiku. 5 stars from my favourite podcast, they go on to say, for finance news mixed in with education and up-to-date information on the markets. And they've actually signed it off Kieran. So Kieran will name check you. Please do get in touch. Damien at moneytothemasses.com. He'd love to hear from you and he'd be delighted to send out a Money to the Masses mug.
And Kieran might not know, I'm a massive haiku fan, actually. I've read lots about it and written some, so I am really impressed with that particular review. But the other review that I'm really impressed with is by Matt, is the name that's been signed by. Matt, if you're out there, send in your email address, damien at moneytothemasses.com, as you will also receive a Money to the Masses mug, because your review was just as creative. I'm not going to read the whole thing out, but it was split into a series of lines. For example, the first one, Money to the Masses is an excellent resource for learning about all things personal finance. Unbiased and friendly delivery.
And before you go on, Damien, just if we're getting technical about poems and everything else, this is actually an acrostic poem.
Well, I'm amazed. You learn something every day. Did you Google that, or did you know that, Andy?
No, I actually knew that because my daughter absolutely loves making up acrostic poems, which is where you put the first letter and then you put details about whatever you're writing about.
And you spell out a word and actually or phrase. In this case, it spells out mug, please. So, Matt, you have won yourself, or earned yourself, I should say, a Money to the Masses mug, so do write in. So, getting on with the podcast then, this week we are going to do something slightly different. Lauren is coming onto the show, and I'm big on Threads at the moment. So Threads is that new social media platform from Meta. So if you're on Instagram, you'll see me write about it. So on Threads, the way I'm using it, it's like the new version of Twitter. I'm actually putting insights on there. So not me just talking about what I'm having for lunch or anything like that. I'm writing lessons about money so you can learn every day by reading them. And some of the bits come or are inspired by the podcast. This instance is the other way around, because when I came back from holiday, there are a whole series of things money related that I do each time I go away. So in terms of insurance, all these things, and I put it down as a thread, as a series of things. Follow these and you won't go far wrong. And I then shared it on Instagram in our stories, and it was incredibly popular. One of the most popular things I've put out there, actually. So I thought, hold on a second, people seem to want to know what these tips are. So I thought it made sense to do a podcast special, because assuming you've booked your holiday, it's holiday season, you're going to go away, but there's that checklist of things you need to do money-wise to make sure that you A, have a good holiday, B, don't spend more than you need to, and also C, don't get conned. So we're going to run through those tips, but we're also going to expand upon them because Lauren's here with me. So welcome to the show, Lauren.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be back.
Are you due to go on holiday soon?
No, I've already been.
Where did you go?
Gran Canaria.
Gran Canaria. I went to Menorca, so I've never been to Menorca. It's very lovely. So jumping straight on to the tips. I wrote the thread, and as I say, it proved incredibly popular. And the first thing I wrote on that particular thread was in relation to travel insurance. As I said at the beginning of the piece, we're going to cover all areas of holiday finances, but travel insurance is a big one. So you're going to have to shop around for travel insurance. As soon as you book your holiday, my tip is, of course, book your travel insurance, because travel insurance doesn't just protect you if you fall ill, for example, or have an accident while you're on holiday, or you lose your luggage. By buying travel insurance straight away, it will ensure that you're covered if you are unable to go on holiday. Say, for example, there are strikes, or you fall ill, or you lose a job. So it's important to take out travel insurance as soon as you book your holiday. Most people seem to book a holiday, get excited about that, and forget to do insurance until the last minute. I mean, in my younger days, I even remember booking travel insurance almost as I was about to fly. In theory, some travel insurance policies don't like you or allow you to book insurance or take out insurance on the day that you travel, so that's something worth bearing in mind.
And also on that, actually, as well, it can affect the cost if you're doing it last minute. It could potentially be more expensive. But one thing to consider, particularly where you mentioned the strikes, is if you are risking buying travel insurance just before you go and it had been announced that there was a potential strike, you are risking not being covered, because then that is a known entity to you before you travel, and therefore if you couldn't get somewhere because of a strike, your travel insurance provider could refuse to make a claim because you already knew that strikes were imminent in the next few days.
Yeah, so make sure you do take out that insurance as soon as you can, because as Lauren said, if there's strikes, they won't pay out if it was a known event. What about, because I know when I was away, there was lots about the fires in Europe, and you did a piece of work actually on that, didn't you, with travel insurance?
Yeah, so I had a bit of a look to see if travel insurance would cover you if you were affected by a wildfire. And interestingly, what most of the travel insurance providers said, which actually is common for most travel insurance claims anyway, is that they do like you to speak to your tour operator or your holiday provider before making a claim. They like for you to try and make a claim elsewhere, whether that is trying to change the date of your holiday, or if you can't get a refund via your holiday provider, potentially try and seek a refund via Section 75 if you've booked it on a credit card. So that is something to consider, and it is worth always looking that if you do have any extra cover for things like natural disasters. Stay Sure, for example, I know they have an addition that you can add to your policy which would cover you for natural disasters. But in this instance, again, as I previously mentioned, if you knew about the wildfires before you bought your travel insurance policy, then you wouldn't be covered at all.
So just sticking with travel insurance for the moment, I have a pre-existing medical condition. I talk about it on the podcast quite openly. I have Crohn's disease, and so I have to be quite particular about getting travel insurance. Otherwise, it's extortionately expensive, or my condition would be covered. But the important thing is, obviously, if I'm booking a holiday, and going back to the tip I mentioned about being covered if I can't travel, part of the cover if I take out insurance would be something seriously bad happened because of my Crohn's and I couldn't travel on holiday. And that's happened in the past, actually, many years ago. And so I have to look at travel insurance for people with pre-existing medical conditions, and the best options actually, because some travel insurance companies are specialists in this regard, aren't they? And you've done lots of research around this, which I do pick your brains about when I do go away. So I am fortunate in that. And so you've got an article that you've done on that.
Yeah, so on the website we have an article which covers which travel insurance providers help to cover pre-existing conditions, but it is quite interesting, and it is always worth shopping around because each provider may cover a different condition, because they have this screening process that when you go online, you can put in your pre-existing medical condition and it will tell you if you're likely to get cover. And different insurers use a different screening process, which could mean that one insurer may refuse to cover you, but another one will offer you cover. And interestingly as well, if you have been refused cover, you can visit the Money Helper directory, which will give you a list of travel insurance providers that will insure you if you have a pre-existing medical condition.
So we'll put links to the articles on the Money to Masses website in the notes of this podcast and a video that's going to go out on YouTube, so you can go straight through to that particular article. But just for people who listen to this in audio only, can you list a couple of the companies that are quite well known for being good for people with pre-existing medical conditions?
Yeah, so a few of them that we mention are All Clear Travel, Avanti Travel Insurance, Holiday Extras, Stay Sure and Virgin Money. They are quite good at covering pre-existing medical conditions. Just one thing I would like to add on to that, it is imperative that you do declare any pre-existing medical condition, and this goes for any condition that you may develop since you took out your policy. If you took out the policy earlier on in the year when you booked your holiday, but you're not due to travel for a couple of months and you develop an illness in that time, do contact your travel insurance provider and let them know, because you could risk not being covered should you fall ill while you're away.
Yeah, and that's a good tip, because it's different to life insurance. So we have to realise, I think some people think, oh, if I take out life insurance, I don't have to tell them about things that happen to my health subsequently. Travel insurance is different, so bear that in mind. So moving on to really number 2 of the checklist. This wasn't actually in the thread, I'll add it subsequently. So we're expanding upon that thread in this podcast, is the G-HIT card, which needs to go alongside and complement your travel insurance policy.
Yeah, particularly if you're travelling in Europe, then you do need to have a G-HIT card, which is a UK Global Health Insurance card. And by having one of these, this ensures that you can have access to medical care in certain countries in Europe. Now, there are some exclusions, so you will need to make sure you are aware of them before you do travel. But it is also important to note that the GHIC does not replace a travel insurance policy. It ensures you can get access to emergency medical treatment while you are abroad. But if you did need medical repatriation, for example, you would need a travel insurance policy to cover you for that. But also if you lost your baggage, you had delays, cancellation claims, you do need travel insurance to cover you for that as well.
Yeah, and you mentioned in the office a point that I hadn't quite appreciated myself. While I would get a GHIC card and make sure all my family members had one before we travelled and had travel insurance, but you made an important point that actually some policies, or a lot of policies, will insist that you have a GHIC card, and if you don't, then you're not going to be technically covered.
Yeah, so StaySure is a travel insurance policy that has it in their policy terms and conditions that if you are travelling to Europe, you do need to ensure you have a GHIC card before you travel. So do ensure you check your policy documents before you travel to make sure that you are covered.
So next on my checklist, car hire. So assuming you've shopped around for your car hire, the bugbear of mine regarding car hire is when you turn up and you then start to be pressurised into buying insurance policies in case there is an accident. And it just seems to be a way of them extracting more money from you. So one of the tips is to arrange your car excess hire insurance before you go. And again, there's going to be a link in the notes to some analysis that Lauren's carried out in regard to this, because historically there was only really one or two providers of this type of insurance, but there's a number of them now, isn't there? I mean, iCar Hire Insurance was the well-known brand, and there's a few others, aren't there now?
Yeah, a few others, such as Holiday Extras, for example. They offer car hire excess insurance. Eversure, they do the same thing as well. And it's really interesting that if you do hire a car abroad, to have a look around before you travel. Try and book in advance if you can, and pay online for a cheaper rate. I did a bit of analysis in my article which highlighted a difference between booking your car hire 2 months in advance and 1 week in advance. There was about £50 difference, which obviously if you do it even further, you could be saving yourself more money.
So the earlier you do it, the more money you can save. And the other thing is, I looked at it, and just to give people some figures, I listened to the podcast and I want them to have an idea. If you went to Europe for say 7 days, you could get a policy that will cover you for that car hire excess. That insurance policy, if you planned it ahead of time, could cost you probably as little as £20. And so that is substantially cheaper than what you could be paid at the desk. And I mean, I've done it and saved myself hundreds of pounds while on holiday, and particularly if you go for longer holidays as well. So make sure you do book it before you go, so you can basically stop them in their tracks when they try and sell you something. Do make sure you have a credit card. And not everybody wants a credit card, but credit cards help when you're hiring a car and you've got enough balance on there, because they will still want to take a payment. They basically lock a part of your credit card in case you damage the car, and therefore they've got to charge you for the repair, because the policy that you take out for the car hire excess insurance, that's completely separate to the company itself you're borrowing the car from. So if you do make a claim, there's an accident, for example, effectively that insurance policy gives you back the money you would have had taken from you by the car hire company on your credit card. So I was at the car hire company, and standing next to me was a man who was clearly very affluent, because all he wouldn't stop going on about his holiday home in France and all this kind of stuff. And he didn't have a credit card. And in the end, they turned him away and said, look, we can't accept a debit card. And he was telling them how much money he had in his bank account. But their argument was that the company policies, they're unable to actually just lock money in a bank account. They'd have to actually take it and refund it to him. And if they did that over tens of hundreds of cars in a day, the amount of money that was going back and forth would actually ratchet up, and the expense. So message is, credit cards do make life easier just for facilitating hiring cars and bits and pieces. But do make sure, we'll come on to this in a minute, about credit cards. If you're going to start spending abroad, then there are better ways often than just using your existing credit card. There are credit cards that give good rates when it comes to spending abroad.
Yeah, and to just touch on that just before we move on and taking your money abroad, when you do hire a car, do make sure you take photos of the car, because I do find, you might have the odd scratch that they try and blame you on, or the alloy. So go around, it may seem fairly fairly obvious, you probably do it anyway, but do make sure you take photos of it. And then also make sure you're not paying over the odds for any extras. Are you paying £70 for a sat nav when you could do it on your phone? They're all little things that add up that could save you money.
And car seats, so I've got children. You can normally take a car seat with you as an additional piece of luggage on certain airlines. It doesn't count as part of your luggage allowance often, so check that, and therefore you don't have to hire one for the entire holiday from the car hire company. So we take it ourselves, and it just goes through the luggage and it goes into the sort of larger luggage section and you pick it up at the airport. But as you say, I filmed my car, so I walked around it, took loads of photos, every minor bit of information. That's because obviously the photos have the digital information stored in them when it was taken, and in fairness to the car hire company I used, they did encourage us to do that rather than go back and report any scratches to them. Take photos and then we sort it out later. But of course, it happened to be a new car, so it was quite handy. There was very limited damage on it, but at the end when you give it back, make sure you do exactly the same thing at the point when you take it back and film it in situ at the car hire place in case there's any problem in the future. So car hire, that's done. Holiday money. So this is a big one, okay? So we've got articles talking about the best ways to take money abroad. I'm not one for taking cash anymore. Take a little bit maybe for tips, bits and pieces like that. But there are now credit cards, obviously, that you can get that have no transaction fees or no withdrawals on cash. I wouldn't ever suggest withdrawing on a credit card anyway, but there are bank accounts. For example, First Direct have just come out and they've announced that they aren't charging transaction fees anymore abroad, and they also aren't on cash withdrawals, which is pretty good. You will still inevitably have to pay any ATM charges that are levied by the provider of the ATM when you're abroad, but the bank itself isn't going to. So there's a list of other providers in the article that Lauren's done in the past, but two, I think my personal favourites are Starling and Revolut. So it's a rare instance where I disclose products that I use, but I did actually take out a Starling account just because of the benefits of using it abroad. And Revolut I'd always had for a long period of time. Starling is a bank account. Revolut isn't actually a bank in the UK, and I use that as a prepaid card. And the other benefit of Revolut is you can actually get a free child's card, and they can use that abroad for spending as well. So it works like a child's card you can pocket money on if you want to, and then they can use that abroad. So that's quite handy. But with Starling, I think Starling's quite good because, again, if you look at the rate that you get, because it uses the exchange rate at the time, it's MasterCard I think by Starling, isn't it, Lauren? And they don't charge for transactions or ATM withdrawals. A general tip actually is if you've got both cards, then I would use Starling during the weekends and probably Revolut during the week, or Starling all the time, because Revolut, they levy an extra small charge over the weekend to allow for the fact that the exchange rates don't quite move fluidly, whereas Starling, their exchange rates are live the whole time, aren't they? So I do like Starling. So if you use that, you can move money in the account instantly and then you can spend. And also, they've now got virtual cards they've just launched on Starling, which means that you can now pay via things like Apple Pay with a virtual card they create. So if you have a pot that's your holiday money with them, you could spend directly from that pot rather than it coming out of your current account, which I also quite like.
Yeah, I must admit that's probably my favourite thing about Starling now. As we've mentioned on the podcast before, I used to be cabin crew, so I used to travel around the world, and I used to use Revolut quite a lot because I didn't want to risk my card being cloned in all the different countries that I went to. So Revolut was my separate spending money when I was at work, and I then kept my, obviously, bank account separate. Whereas now I tend to prefer to use Starling because of the new virtual cards, and you go away and you literally just spend on that card using the Apple Pay. And I just found that really useful, the fact that you knew that the pink card, for example, was your holiday spending money. And I even use it in the UK now as well. I can have the blue card, which I know is my petrol money, and then you can have the green card, which you know is your food money. Another thing to consider with Starling as well is they don't actually have any limits on the free foreign ATM withdrawals and the free overseas spending, whereas Revolut does limit you on its standard account before it starts charging a small fee.
Yeah, so you can have the different plans of Revolut that you can subscribe to effectively, which is why I then started moving over to Starling. And the other benefit is, of course, your partner can get a Starling card too, and you can actually then have a joint account with them if you wanted to and use that for your spending. And also Starling, when you take an account with them, you don't get credit checked because they don't offer you a overdraft as standard. So that's something to bear in mind.
Yeah, another one to consider just while we're we're on the topic of spending abroad is Chase Bank as well, because if you do have an account with them, they do offer you the added bonus of cashback, and you do get that on transactions in the UK and abroad, so that's something to consider too.
So we've got reviews of all of these products. Monzo's another one, and obviously if you really want things like credit cards that you want to use abroad that don't charge, there are one or two good ones. We do a roundup every month of the best credit cards, a video on YouTube, you can see that. But we also cover the best travel credit card, and at the moment our pick is the
Barclaycard Rewards credit card, or the Halifax Clarity credit card is quite a good choice too.
So before I move on from currency, one thing I would say, remember the phrase, when in Rome, do as the Romans do, because when it comes to paying for anything using your card, you'll be asked which currency you want to pay in, whether it's the local currency or in sterling. Always choose local currency. So when in Rome, do as the Romans do, pay in local currency, because otherwise you could fall foul, or you will fall foul of something called dynamic currency conversion, where the retailer can potentially add an additional charge, supposedly up to as much as 4%. So pay in the local currency. Moving on to next on my checklist, we've got to cover mobile phones. So you've done, again, some analysis. I tell you what, if people could hire you, Lauren, and take you on holiday, it would probably work really well for you and for them, actually. We've done analysis on the mobile phone providers that charge to roam. That includes in the EU and, of course, outside of the EU, so globally. And there are some providers that still don't charge you for roaming in the EU. They are people like Asda, I think, is one of them. We've got a list. There's some of them. giffgaff is another. O2. It depends sometimes on when you've joined these providers. There was PlusNet, although PlusNet Mobile is soon to cease to exist. So do have a look, because you may already benefit from free roaming, or you might be thinking about changing your mobile phone. Of course, you could theoretically get a local SIM while you're out there to get cheaper deals, but the thing I would say is make sure you check before you go how much you'll be charged for using your device abroad. We've got a link in the notes of this podcast, but you need to check personally, because it very much is dependent on you and when you joined the mobile provider. But once you know, then you might have to buy a bolt-on package, but often you don't need to, but at least you'll know the charge. But one thing I would say is do check about tethering, so whether other people can basically attach to your mobile phone and use your data. Because if they can, and it's included in the price, normally what happens, you'll be charged, say, something £2 to £3 a day in Europe while you're travelling to use your data, just like you would at home. There are sometimes some caveats where you will get charged, but if you can use your data and members of your family can tether to you, then they can turn their data roaming off and they won't be charged, so one of you gets charged rather than all of you. And the other thing is, if they turn their data roaming off, then they can use local Wi-Fi and just use calls and etc. via that if they want to. So it was what my family did when we went away. I used my mobile phone, so I paid the daily charge, but the rest of my family didn't need to. And then when we were around places where we had Wi-Fi, they could use their Wi-Fi. We also downloaded films onto iPads and things before we went, because you can do that with things like Netflix, etc. So you've got stuff for when you're travelling out and about, but you can also do that when you then arrive somewhere that's got Wi-Fi. You can change it and update it, so bear that in mind. I'm going to move on now to the next on the list, car parking. So airport car parking, there's a good chance that you may be leaving your car at the airport. It's worth shopping around before you go to do it. So rather than just turning up at the airport and paying whatever the charge is for the on-site parking, if you book before, you can save money.
Yeah, exactly. There's different websites that you can try, such as travelsupermarket.com, holidayextras.co.uk, and they can sometimes offer you some kind of deal. Do you know as well, when we booked one of our holidays, we actually went into the shop, and for some reason they had this kind of deal on that meant that we got car parking and a lounge deal included in something ridiculous for like £18, and we ended up parking for a week and winning a lounge for £18. And I couldn't even believe it. I don't even know why. I don't know if they were so happy that we finally went into the shop. I don't know what it was.
So people are going to be sitting there thinking, Laura knows everything about airports and travelling. But again, we've done analysis on the cost of airport lounges, because we've done a podcast on it in the past, but but I'm not going to refer you to that. I'm going to refer you again to the article on the website, because if you've got a family and you're going to be in the airport for a while and you're going to have to eat a meal, etc., it can be cheaper to buy airport access for your family in advance, and then you can pretty much eat and drink as much as you want in there and actually have a seat and some nice surroundings, watch TV, etc. So we've put the cost of all the different airport lounges in a table. It'll be too much to run through it on the podcast, but needless to say, what are we talking about, rough costs?
They can vary for anything from £15 for children and up to £28, £30 for an adult. So it's worth having a look at that article and working it out whether it is cheap if you were going on holiday with your family for you to do it. Because if you do work out how much you roughly spend when you're at the airport, you know, if you're going into a Nando's for something and having something to eat, everything's gone up in cost, and you go into Smith's and you get your magazine and your sweets. So by the time you've done all of that, it could be worthwhile going in the lounge.
And to say that I had to remortgage my house to have breakfast in the airport on the day that I went, and I didn't use an airport lounge, unfortunately. One of the tips on the parking is to look at staying in a hotel. So when I went a week ago, I stayed in a fairly, a nice hotel, but the cost of it was only about £20 more than having to pay for parking for a week. So effectively, I got to stay in a hotel the night before, almost for the same price as if I was parking, if I paid for it separately. So the parking is often free with hotel stays. Do look around for a deal, because it can be worthwhile. We were flying very early in the morning, so it was a really good deal. So do look around for that. You could also park on someone's drive. There is justpark.com, is that the website, Lauren, where you can look for people's drives who live nearby, and they will let you park on their drive for a small fee. So that is an option as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that one's a little bit inventive. I'm not sure how far away you are from the airport when you do that, but I like the idea of staying in a hotel the night before, particularly because it takes out the stress of having to go on the motorway and sit there if there's an accident. So, and that's definitely something to consider when you know that your car's going to be safe and you're not going to come back. That's one tip actually, and I did see a video on this the other day, to take a picture of your mileage on your car. I saw someone the other day on a video and they had left their BMW sports car, and there was a video on the dash cam of the people driving it around the car park. So I do think they are worthwhile. I mean, I've parked in them on with the coaches, but always, you know, maybe do a bit of a video and take pictures of your car and the mileage before you go. And if you do have a dash cam, make sure it's on.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that I've booked to stay in a hotel and it had free parking, but the actual parking was not at the hotel. It was, again, a park and ride somewhere else. So bear that in mind as well, because the one I went to this time, it was all in the same place. So you could go to the hotel and just park up and then put your bags in the hotel and go to your room. I did one previously and it was a couple of miles away, and then they had a bus that came across, and that wasn't as comfortable to do. The other thing to bear in mind, I'll just mention it now, is that if the hotel does allow you to park and then they have a bus that might go to the airport, if it isn't directly on site, Stansted is a good example. They might all have a short bus ride. They will sometimes charge you for that bus ride. It isn't free, and so that end up costing you probably a couple of quid per person. Justin wanted to mention this tip. It's not really money saving, but I liked it, and I did use it. It's one of the rare ones you see on these TikTok online things, and you look at it and think, actually, that's pretty good. I'm not sure it's money saving, but pack an extension lead in your suitcase, a small extension lead, so multi-plug, that nowadays obviously lots of them have USB slots as well. So with one plug adapter that you take, one travel plug adapter, you can plug your extension lead in there and be able to charge 4 or 5 different things and devices via the USB lead. So that's something that I did on this particular holiday, and I think I'll do it again.
Yeah, I think that's quite a good tip. His other tip was make sure you pack your swimmers in your hand luggage. So Justin clearly travels light with just his extension lead and his swimmers in his hand luggage, and he's on his way.
If you're interested what happens when you lose your luggage, I will put a link to an episode that happened to me. I lost all my luggage, my wife and I, a few years back. It disappeared, and we arrived in Barcelona with no luggage at all. Luggage had gone to Italy, so I'll put a link to that episode just for the comedy value, but to explain what happened subsequent to that event and how it panned out. The other thing that I would mention is a VPN, so a virtual private network. So you can get free VPNs, so they're basically software that allows you to surf anonymously. I'm not thinking about looking up naughty things on the internet, but it's more about if you need to do financial stuff or your email checking and that sort of thing, you shouldn't really log on to public Wi-Fi to do it. So if you put a VPN, turn it on, then you can use that public Wi-Fi quite happily because it encrypts what you're doing. So you can get free ones of those out there. So go and have a look around. I think that's a good idea.
I used to use them as well when I was flying, and funnily enough, it didn't always work, but sometimes you could change your destination country when you was browsing Netflix. So if I went somewhere and I couldn't watch it in a certain country, I used to put in the VPN that I was somewhere else and I could get the shows that I wanted to. So it doesn't always work, it's not foolproof, but it's always worth a try.
Not foolproof, but I did use it to watch the England Lionesses play the other day when I was supposed to not be allowed to. But yeah, it does sometimes work. And I have actually, in a holiday last year, we went to America and I used it while I was in the UK to pretend I was in the US to buy cheaper tickets to Disney World than if I'd been in the UK, because it wouldn't allow us to use a website, because it would always default to a UK version of the website, which would charge you more. But I was able to buy tickets as if I was in the US, and I could get certain deals, because I think from memory you couldn't buy individual day passes at a cheaper rate. You had to buy the big block weekly ones in the UK. So there is a way, if you use them before you go on holiday, to get a better deal. So that's my checklist done. I think if you follow that, you can't go far wrong, and you should hopefully have a holiday where you don't have to worry about the financial impact or things going wrong when you get home. Normally you get back home and you can often find your mobile phone bills sky high, or you've paid lots of fees on transactions, etc. So I don't think you can go too far wrong if you follow that. One last thing we're going to finish on is duty free. So I steer completely clear of duty free when I go on holiday, Lauren, but I know you don't.
No, I do like a little wander around duty free, I must admit, yeah.
So there's an app, isn't there, that can give you more discount on duty free?
Yeah, so there's an app called Red by Due Free, which is available on iOS and Android, and basically it's a loyalty scheme for duty free. So if you are a frequent traveller and often find yourself in duty free, maybe getting your makeup or your alcohol, you can save up to 5% off purchases and then earn loyalty rewards as well. So it's always worth just having it, and you just scan it when you pay. And on that, actually, when I went away to Gran Canaria, we were in the airport. I'm one of these people that my holiday starts as soon as I get to the airport, and I think I've got endless amounts of money. And we went into duty free and decided to buy some sunglasses. And my partner, he went into one of the shops and decided he wanted the sunglasses that were in there, but I didn't like any in that shop, so he bought that, got a receipt, and I went into the shop next door. It's basically exactly the same shop, but for some reason it had a different pair of sunglasses in it. And on his receipt he had 20% off. So he just paid full price for his sunglasses, and I went next door and got 20% off on these sunglasses. So we were walking through the airport with our brand new sunglasses, and probably basically spent our budget before we gone away, but we were happy.
But what you mean is that on top of the saving you would have got, you got an extra 20% because you didn't buy them both at the same time. So one bought after the other. That's quite interesting. So yeah, I avoid duty free. I just never, unless there's something in particular that I would be after, but I've never really found that things are a lot cheaper. But there we go. So that is it for this week on the Money to the Masses podcast. We will be back as normal, talking about broader things rather than just holidays, but I thought it was good to do a holiday special given that I know a lot of people will be going away in the coming weeks. So Andy, all that's left is do the usual admin.
That's right, we'll do the usual admin. Can I just say before we move on to that, I can't believe you've never bought a massive Toblerone. Surely that's what duty free is for. I must have bought one every time I go flying.
But you know, I think the new thing is Tic Tacs. My children are obsessed. You could get a giant Tic Tac box with lots of small Tic Tac boxes inside them. So it's a sort of global climate disaster, but from a packaging and child's perspective, it's sort of nirvana. But yeah, that seems to be the new thing.
Okay, so that is us done for this week. If you want to get in touch with Damien, you can do so in the usual way. It's Damien at moneytothemasses.com. Myself, it's Andy at moneytothemasses.com. And why don't you drop Lauren a message to say thanks for her wonderful tips this week? You can always contact Lauren about anything to do with travel, car insurance, home insurance. She'd love to hear from you. It's Lauren at moneytothemasses.com.
And can I just give you a small hint there? Lauren is actually the guardian of the Money to the Masses mug. She hasn't sort of told you that. So if you email Lauren, it's likely that you could get a Money to the Masses mug come creeping out to you.
Oh,
so
you've opened Pandora's box there. That's a real dangerous thing.
I have to ask Lauren if we've got mugs to send out and if we're allowed to. So yeah, technically Lauren is the keeper.
Okay, so please do review the podcast in the usual way through your apps. Give us 5 stars. Would absolutely appreciate that. We've got the Facebook group as usual. If you haven't joined that, please do. There's lots going on. It's facebook.com/groups/money to the masses.
And obviously Instagram and now Threads. You can find the Threads profile by going via Instagram. I'm not going to read it out because the Threads profiles are a random string of numbers at the moment. So go follow us on Instagram and Threads.
And so that's it. We're done for this week. Until next time.
Until next time.